People at Marvel. Asking Spider-Man at the beginning. Chapter 11. Late at night. After Dr. Connors was taken away and imprisoned, Nick Fury saw that it was getting late and invited Stark and Peter Parker to stay overnight at S.H.I.E.L.D. In fact, the two of them also have this intention, because in recent days, there are too many questions in their hearts, and they urgently need to find answers. What exactly is that magic choice question? Nick Fury looked questioning and threw questions at Peter Parker and Stark. Since they first saw those questions, their group seems to have received some kind of underworld blessing, and they can get rewards through multiple choice questions, and even predict something in advance. For example, Dr. Lizard Connors. If Peter Parker hadn't guessed the answer, no one would have known that the kind and friendly Connors would have turned into Dr. Lizard at night. I don't know. Peter Parker shook his head vigorously, recalling the original multiple choice question, and added, I thought he would let the two of us see the topic at the same time, but it seems that Dr. Connors' proof will not necessarily be seen by both of us. Exactly, although this multiple choice question is useful, we have been led by his nose all this time. Nick Fury said quietly. Then he and Parker, who also couldn't get the answer, looked sideways at Stark on the side, intending to get the answer from this genius brain. Even if it's just some speculation. What the hell are you talking about? Stark said with a confused look. Since just now, he has watched Nick Fury have an encrypted call with Peter Parker, and what the two said, Stark does not know anything, and he can't understand it at all. You'll have a chance to understand. Nick Fury looked indifferent and didn't want to explain more. But there was no need for a chance, because Stark understood what the two of them meant in the next second. In front of the three people, a subtitle similar to a hologram suddenly appeared, blocking the middle of the field of vision, so that they had to pay attention to the topic. The above content is a completely new problem. In S.H.I.E.L.D., who is Hydra's undercover agent? A. Nick Fury. B. Agent Hill. C. Pressure Mountain Big Pierce. D. Steve Rogers. Choose correctly to get the exact location of Captain Steve. Choice failed. Nick Fury, Peter Parker, Tony Stark. All life is folded in half. It seems that this is a very serious issue, and it is even emphasized by using a border. Seeing this topic, Peter Parker said lightly. Wait, why am I in this title? Nick Fury looked confused, and his small eyes were full of big doubts. You're asking us. Stark suddenly got up from the couch and took a dozen steps back. It was clear that he didn't trust Nick Fury. I can guarantee that I am not, do not doubt me. Nick Fury defended himself. Then why are you in this multiple choice question? It's a very amazing thing, and if you're completely irrelevant, you won't be in the title. Stark remains vigilant and does not dispel suspicions of Nick Fury. Is it suspicious that I appear in the title? Nick Fury pointed to the multiple choice question in front of him and said loudly, Captain Steve is also in it, why don't you say that he is also a Hydra? Maybe you're all. Stark drive. While the two were arguing fiercely, Peter Parker looked at the two and wondered, what the hell is Hydra? An organization of agents of the Third Reich, now independent, has since been at enmity of S.H.I.E.L.D. After a simple explanation, Stark realized that this was top secret information, so he added, my father Howard told me that he knows everything about Captain Steve and Hydra. That was more serious than I thought. Peter Parker said with a wry smile. No matter what, I won't be Hydra's person, otherwise I will definitely kill you in the first place. Nick Fury said coldly. Hearing this, Stark thought for a moment and felt that this was really the truth. If Peter Parker is an outsider and Hydra doesn't do anything to him, then Tony Stark is Howard Stark's son and must be targeted by Hydra. If Nick Fury is really Hydra, then he has no reason to let himself go. Well, I trust you for now. Stark let his guard down, returned to his seat, and began to check the other answers. Agent Hill, it should be S.H.I.E.L.D., do you think she is possible? No way, I've carefully reviewed her information, unless Hydra pulled her into the gang when she was 3 years old, Hill definitely couldn't be. Nick Fury denied it outright. Captain Steve is even more unlikely, this guy has been fighting with Hydra for several years. Stark didn't even think about it and skipped the D option. In the end, his eyes fell on the last option, which was the name of Pressure Mountain Pierce. No. No way. Nick Fury's eyes widened, and he shook his head again and again to deny, no way. He was the last director of S.H.I.E.L.D., presided over a lot of big things, and he was very well connected and prestigious. He could never be. If he can't either, it's you, Nick Fury. As Stark spoke, he gave Peter Parker a look, signaling him to restrain Nick Fury as soon as something happened. How many times have I said it, not me? Nick Fury slapped his palm on the table next to him and said angrily. It won't always be Captain Stephen Hill, and you think it's impossible to be under pressure, who else will it be? Stark said calmly. Hearing this, Nick Fury panicked. Now the answer is like this, not only him, but also Hill, Steve Rogers is impossible, the only remaining answer is the pressure mountain Pierce. Try it. With a tentative mentality, Nick Fury finally gritted his teeth and chose the fourth option. Choose correctly. The exact location of Captain America has been sent to the Shield Master computer. Wait a minute, is it really Chief Pierce? Nick Fury panicked. He didn't expect that his desperate choice would verify Pierce's true identity. Multiple choice questions will not lie to them. Pierce must be Hydra's undercover agent. Morning is submissive, friend. Stark comforted Nick Fury and said, look around us, something seems to be going on. Hearing this, Nick Fury immediately turned his attention around. As usual, the surrounding situation quickly changed and turned into a gloomy office. The former chief was stressed by Pierce, sitting on the couch in his office. No, how could it be him? Nick Fury looked at Pierce in the room, looking horrified and surprised. Even if the multiple choice question specifically showed this picture in front of him, Nick Fury still couldn't accept this reality. Wait a minute, I'll take something and record it. Stark glanced at the muttering Nick Fury, took out the recorder and began to record what he saw. Nick Fury, Stark, and Peter Parker are in this dark room. But Pierce, the former director of S.H.I.E.L.D., did not notice their presence at all, and even if his eyes swept by several times, he did not respond. You can see that this is just an image. Stark laughed. Agent Siri, what I asked you to do, how did you do it? Pierce sat down on the sofa with his legs crossed, and asked in a deep voice towards a bald agent. On your order, I went to lead the team to search the vicinity of the cosmic Rubik's Cube salvage point, and within 10 miles, we not only searched everywhere, but even sent a submarine. While speaking, Siri showed some of the salvage pictures in front of Pierce through holograms, allowing him to see clearly and believe more that he was indeed doing his best. So you still haven't found Steve Rogers' location? Pierce frowned, a look of dissatisfaction on his face. Even, his right hand has touched his waist, and at the waist there is a holster with a .50 large caliber pistol inside. I gotta say, yes chief, I didn't find it, sorry. Seeing Pierce's reaction, Siri was already trembling. But for some reason, he didn't have the slightest will to resist, just bowed his head there, quietly waiting for Pierce to dispose of him. This extremely strict relationship between superiors and subordinates is no longer like the style of S.H.I.E.L.D. at all. It's like the style of the Secret Service under Himmler of the Third Reich. Forget it. Just when the atmosphere was extremely tense, Pierce shook his head, reached for the holster's hand and touched a cigarette instead. After lighting it and taking a big breath to calm his mood, Pierce spoke. This matter is put on hold for the time being, we can't salvage Steve, and neither can anyone else. Yes. Zilly breathed a sigh of relief, wiped the fine beads of sweat from his forehead, and raised his hand. Long live the Hydra. Quote. Long live Hydra. Pierce returned the salute casually. At this point, the picture ends. It's really Hydra. Stark played the recorded effects in reincarnation, confirming the phrase Pierce shouted many times. Although he had been mentally prepared for a long time, he was still surprised by the Hydra called out by Chief Pierce. This thing is as incredible as Captain Steve suddenly shouting, "Hi Hitler," one day. Director Fury, I don't want to either, but that's the way it is, you have to accept it. Peter Parker looked at Nick Fury and said in a deep voice. Nick Fury is not a sentimental person, and by this time he has adjusted his mentality and gradually accepted this unacceptable reality. The original chief is under pressure, Pierce is Hydra's undercover. Wait. Stark stopped the two who were trying to close the coffin, pointed to the recorder, and said, are you sure that the answer given by that magical multiple choice question must be correct? Hearing this, Nick Fury and Peter Parker closed their eyes, thought for a while, and finally the answers they gave were nodding in acquiescence. The Dr. Lizard we caught before was my teacher Connors, and the multiple choice question accurately identified him. Peter Parker said positively. So what are you waiting for? Now we immediately go to S.H.I.E.L.D. and identify Pierce as a Hydra undercover. Stark pocketed the recorder and his first thought was to dispose of Pierce. After all, although this guy is no longer the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., he is a proper real power, and the connections and prestige he accumulated during his reign are no less than Nick Fury. Such a person lurks in the shadows and is a great threat to all plans that may be carried out in the future. Nope. However, Nick Fury shook his head and denied Stark's idea. Seeing this, Stark and Peter Parker both focused their eyes on Nick Fury, wanting to hear what the S.H.I.E.L.D. director said. The reason why I say no, the reason is very simple. Pierce is the former director, there is still real power in his hands. I don't know how many undercover agents are in S.H.I.E.L.D. We act without permission, and it is more likely to be destroyed by them. Nick Fury analyzed. So shall we sit still? Stark threw the recorder on the table, looking unconcerned. How S.H.I.E.L.D. has nothing to do with him, by that time he will still be the owner of Stark Industries. Of course we can't sit still, we have to do it individually. Saying this, Nick Fury's gaze swept around Peter Parker and Stark. He already had an idea. One day later, in a secret military facility, Pierce stood with his hands in his hands, inspecting the special professional soldiers in front of him. This is his job now. After leaving S.H.I.E.L.D., Pierce did not retire, but used his connections to achieve a better position, that is, to manage various classified military facilities. Here, his identity as Hydra can play a greater role. As long as he controls these military facilities, he actually controls the most powerful force on the planet. Rest, soldiers. Pierce opened his mouth and ordered. As soon as the words fell, all the soldiers immediately took a pause in posture, their eyes unanimously focused on Pierce's face. Seeing this, Pierce took a deep breath and said with an expressionless face, "You are all warriors, you are all heroes, you are four." Before he finished speaking, a person came from behind and gently patted Pierce's arm. Rumlow. Say. Pierce glanced at the right-hand man codenamed Crossbone and ordered in a low voice. Nick Fury's side is still showing his feet after all. I learned that they are forming the Avengers. Iron Man Tony Stark has been pulled into the gang, and there is a Queen's guy named Peter Parker. Rumlow reported in a deep voice. After listening to the contents of the report, Pierce frowned and pondered. After a moment, he said slowly, Stark is as smart as his father. Such a person joining the Avengers must be a resistance. We must find a way to get rid of him. Quote. Kill him. Rumlow's grim proposal. No. Pierce looked away and said coldly, there is a better way. Quote. A week later. Stark Industries building. In the large area at the top belonging to Stark, the floor was covered with a layer of documents, making the entire space look messy. Is it hard to explain when you tell him I'm not there and say I'm on a trip? Stark stood in the center of the document and gave orders to the phone. Yes, sir. A response came from the other end of the phone, followed by a beep when the phone hung up. Putting down the phone, Stark looked at Nick Fury, who was drinking coffee in the corner, and said a little angrily, because of your methods, my company is now being watched by all walks of life, the Tax Bureau, the Investigation Bureau, the Secret Service. Stark spoke, walked up to Nick Fury, and continued, anyway, any department you can think of, they are investigating my company, trying to find flaws in my company. It seems that Pierce has made a force. Nick Fury said calmly. Stark Industries is a giant, and Howard Stark also accumulated a lot of contacts back then, and such a giant company is easily not noticed. But now, only overnight, investigations from various forces flooded in, overwhelming Tony Stark. As a result of the tax investigation, Stark Industries' trading department was shut down and under full investigation by the Department of Revenues. And the Investigative Bureau, the Secret Service, completely brought Stark Industries to a standstill. There was no other reason than to inquire whether Stark Industries had betrayed national interests over the years, whether it had sold weapons or any other industrial products to areas that were blocked by trade. With this combination down, Stark Industries lost 100 million an hour. 100 million knives. I knew I wouldn't join your Avengers. Stark sighed helplessly, held his forehead, and complained, You guys are also very interesting. A bunch of inner ghosts inside S.H.I.E.L.D. Your old boss Pierce still has a lot of energy. You at least wipe your ass clean and form an Avenger. Hearing this very unkind words, Nick Fury gave Iron Man a blank look, but there was nothing to say. After all, he had been in charge for so many years that he had not discovered that his old boss was an undercover agent of Hydra. But now that it has been discovered, it is actually not too late. I have to let you be a target to bring out Pierce's power, and then investigate everyone related to him to find doubts. Nick Fury explained his strategy, then glanced meaningfully at Stark and said quietly, "Thank you, Stark. Being able to hear thank you from your mouth, I suddenly feel that the lost money is not important." Stark joked. Listening to the conversation between the two, Peter Parker of Chenmo spoke from beginning to end. Then Director Fury, have you found any suspicious figures? Of course. Nick Fury nodded and placed the two materials on the table. These two documents show two characters, a mercenary named Rumlow and an agent named Siri. What's suspicious about them? Stark asked. It's suspicious. Rumlow, a mercenary, has done a lot of dirty things for Pierce all over the world. Saying that, Nick Fury put Carrie's information on the top, and continued, this guy is from S.H.I.E.L.D., and he has been jumping up and down to contact other departments these days. I followed him, found out Rumlow, these two have problems. Hearing these words, Stark pinched his chin, pondered for a while, and then suggested, why don't I send someone to check on this Rumlow? Stark Industries used to sell arms, should have had contact with it, and then. Before the next words could be finished, a phone ringing interrupted Stark's words. When Stark patiently answered the phone, Pepper's eager voice came from the other side of the phone. Tony, are you in the company? Pepper asked eagerly. Of course I'm here. How is your side doing? Is today's rebellion appetizing? Stark habitually chatted about everyday life. Don't worry about breakfast anymore. I don't know why. Pepper's tone suddenly increased, and he hurriedly said, Tony, you're in big trouble. Do you know what you'll encounter next? Hearing. A hearing that brings together great pressure from all walks of life. Hearing this, Stark frowned, and the other Nick Fury, who was also frowning, and Peter Parker put on a stunned look. They all know what a hearing means. This means that Pierce has launched a general offensive. This hearing will determine the future of Stark personally and Stark Industries. Whether he can still become Iron Man and join the Avengers will inevitably depend on this hearing. Guys, we're in trouble. Stark hung up the phone and said helplessly. The trouble is not small. Nick Fury also realized the seriousness of the matter, and after pondering for a moment, said, you go to the hearing, I will do my best to help you. Quote. Okay. Stark didn't quite believe Nick Fury, but now that things had come to this point, he couldn't do it if he didn't do it. Afternoon. Press conference building, conference room. More than a dozen important people from all walks of life entered one after another, found their own place and sat down. The venue is arranged in the shape of a circle of seats in the outermost perimeter, surrounding a standing seat in the middle. This is arranged like a courthouse to put psychological pressure on the main objective of the hearing. Being able to arrange it in this way, it can be seen that the mastermind behind the scenes must be a person who is thoughtful and knows very well about interrogation and other means. Stand up. After everyone sat down, suddenly shouts sounded, and everyone immediately got up from their seats and looked at the group of people who came in at the door. The first of those people is Pierce. And the guard with the gun behind him is Crossbone Rumlow. The two swaggered to the center of the edge of the circle-shaped seat, where the seat was the seat that would only be the one who would be decisive for the hearing. Sit down. Pierce patted the table calmly. On his orders, the other hearing participants sat down. When everything was ready, Pierce ordered, let Tony Stark in. Then, under the arrangement of the hearing staff, Stark gradually entered the venue. Tony, I have arranged the best team of lawyers to cheer you on, and each of them has fought at least 200 winning lawsuits. In the audience in the corner of the venue, Harpy stood up and said to Stark as he passed by. Well done, Harpy, I hope all these people you're looking for can help. Stark gave Harpy a thumbs up. The hearing begins. Stark as the reviewee has appeared, followed by the lawyers that Harpy has arranged for him. These lawyers numbered more than a dozen people, lining up to follow Stark to the scene, All of them were middle-aged and older, and they knew at a glance that they were veterans who had been sharpened by lawsuits for a long time. But no matter how veteran they are useless. First of all, this is a hearing, not a lawsuit, Mr. Stark. Pierce's majestic voice sounded. Then he waved his hand, and several security personnel in suits immediately stepped forward and drove all the lawyers behind Stark out. But in front of all the media, those lawyers were driven one by one like pigs, without mercy. And these lawyers are all middle class and above, and they are naturally unhappy to be treated like this. Even hearings have to have lawyers. Mr. Pierce, I will accuse you. This is not legal. Federal law states that Mr. Stark can have the right to counsel. The lawyers shouted. But then, the lawyer's assistant suddenly trotted up to them and put phone calls to the lawyer's ears. Then they heard a voice in unison. Hello lawyers, I am a mercenary, I have nothing to do with Mr. Pierce, the kidnapping of your family is purely to take revenge on you lawyers, you deserve to die. The gloomy voice on the other side of the phone was followed by a brief silence, followed by the cries of women and children. Hearing this, the lawyers' faces turned green, and they immediately realized that they had entered a vortex that they should not have entered at all. The hearing was meant to be conducted against Stark, and it didn't need to be pushed by others. But Alexander Pierce came out halfway and interfered with the hearing, and the kidnapping of the lawyers' families must have been what he did. But there is no way, even if the lawyers' families are killed, it will be characterized as a violent act against the legal profession, and it has nothing to do with Pierce. This is Yang Mo. I think that since it is a hearing for Mr. Stark, it is still a special procedure, and I really do not need a lawyer. 1. Person was the first to be unable to support it, confessed on the spot, and ran away with his assistant. Some people began, and the rest of the lawyers, who were already trembling, expressed their absolute decision not to interfere with the hearing, and then left directly. Harpy spent tens of millions of knives and promised to form a team of lawyers who were divided into 5 million by one person afterwards, and was collapsed in an instant by Pierce's operation. Good means, Mr. Pierce. Stark said quietly. I don't know why the lawyers and gentlemen left, but I know why you are here, Stark, and I announce that from this moment, the hearing has officially begun. Pierce struck the hammer expressionlessly, and began the hearing of Stark like a legal trial. And after a few minutes, Pepper belatedly arrived, looked at Stark standing in the center, and asked Harpy, what's the situation, why is there no lawyer? Don't ask me. Harpy shrugged, looking helpless. Meanwhile, inside S.H.I.E.L.D., Nick Fury and Peter Parker are also watching the big screen and participating in the hearing. It can be seen that Pierce's purpose is to completely deprive Iron Man of his identity, so that he has no way to join the Avengers and cannot serve S.H.I.E.L.D. Nick Fury habitually stood with his hands in his hands and published an analysis of the current situation. Not only that, if Hydra is really an evil organization, then Pierce will inevitably ask Stark to hand over the armor, as well as the design of the arc reactor. Peter Parker looked at Pierce's cold face on the screen, and felt more and more shuddering. If it was really as he guessed, the hearing required Stark to hand over the armor, then Hydra would get the armor, and then the strength would definitely increase geometrically. Don't sit still. Parker, I need you to go to a coordinate where Steve will be excavated. No one knows Hydra better than him, and now we are all enemies in this situation and need his help very much. While giving the order, Nick Fury walked over to the computer and showed Peter Parker a coordinate. That coordinate is in Antarctica, which is the coordinate of Captain Steve obtained after doing the multiple choice question correctly. For so many years, S.H.I.E.L.D. has been trying to search for the location of the captain, but only found the Rubik's Cube, not Steve Rogers. Until now, there is finally an opportunity. How am I going to get by? Now that S.H.I.E.L.D. Pierce's internal response is also active, if you directly let me fly to Antarctica, I'm afraid it will be discovered soon, right? Peter Parker asked, wondering in his heart. Of course, that's why I need you to go. As Nick Fury spoke, he picked up the model airplane on the table and pointed to the belly of the plane. You just go over like this, and then I will use my own connections and send someone to pick you up. In this way, Peter Parker also understood what Nick Fury meant, and although he was not very willing, he could only nod. At this point, everyone has to make sacrifices. I wish Stark would have lasted a little longer. Nick Fury frowned tightly, his heart full of worry. Half an hour later. A shield plane secretly carries agents to the Amazon, and on this journey, it passes through the South Pole halfway. Peter Parker found an opportunity to dodge the guards and climb directly on the bottom half of the plane. After several hours of flight, the plane has come to the top of the Antarctic Glacier, which is not far from the scheduled coordinate location. Hopefully, SHIELD's scientific skills are as reliable as Stark Industries' ones. Peter Parker was climbing on the belly of the plane at this time, looking at the endless glacier below, and his heart was a little bottomless. It was an adventurous operation, and his outfit was only a watch with coordinates, a parachute, and a digging bomb. Arriving above the coordinates, the watch makes a dinging warning sound. Peter Parker directly released the plane, free fell and ripped off the parachute during the descent. The process was a little easier than expected, and when Peter Parker landed on the glacier, he looked down, confirmed that the coordinates were similar, took out the digging bomb and put it on the ice, and immediately fled. 10 seconds later, the bomb exploded and a tunnel more than 20 meters long was blown out. "Captain Steve, I want you inside," Peter Parker muttered to himself as he went deep into the tunnel, and finally saw an ice cube at the bottom, and on the ice was a strong man dressed in blue. "I found it." Peter Parker breathed a sigh of relief and walked over to Captain Steve. Now he has no other equipment, and if he wants to take Captain Steve, he must take it with the ice. But this is difficult for Peter Parker, who is also a Spider-Man with several tons of power. Parker then punched the ice and took Captain Steve out of the tunnel with his hands like chisels. However, because Steve froze for too long, Peter Parker did not dare to thaw it easily, so he still kept him in the state of ice. "Director Fury, Captain Steve has been found by me. Where is the person you sent to pick me up?" Peter Parker, carrying a large ice cube containing Steve, asked as he walked out of the tunnel towards his watch. There was silence on the other side of the watch for a moment, and then Nick Fury's voice came out. "I guess he's almost there now." As soon as the words fell, there was a bell sound directly in front of Peter Parker, and he lowered his arm and looked over, only to see a man riding a sleigh and directing a dozen airha, galloping on the glacier. A few minutes later, the man stopped in front of Parker and pointed to the sled behind him. "Come up." Quote. "Okay." Parker nodded and sat up with a large ice cube on his back. Although the man did pick him up, Parker was somewhat disappointed. He originally thought that Nick Fury would send some supersonic fighter or other high-tech means to pick him up, but these were all fantasy. From Nick Fury, a SHIELD vehicle does not dare to adjust, it is enough to see the current situation of SHIELD. Because of Pierce's existence, anyone other than Peter Parker and Tony Stark has enough reason to be suspected, and indeed cannot be taken lightly. Hearing this side, "Mr. Tony Stark, according to various sources, your armor is very powerful, and I don't think you, as the president of a private enterprise, rather than a military officer, should have such equipment." Pierce stared at Stark coldly, his voice flat but majestic. With that, he picked up the remote control and pressed the play button towards the display screen at the hearing venue. Above, a drone perspective is shown. In this God's perspective, Tony Stark is in the Middle East, and he is in front of a dozen civilians who have been abducted by terrorists. These civilians cried and screamed, and they were all terrified. The terrorists pointed their guns at civilians in an attempt to get Stark to compromise. But in the next second, the shoulder of Stark's armor ejected weapons, killing all the terrorists. The whole process takes less than a second. "What do you mean by that?" Stark pointed to the screen and said dissatisfied, "Can't you see that I saved them? If I hadn't been there, what would have happened to those civilians?" "I don't care what happened to the civilians, I just want to ask you, Mr. Stark, do you admit that the person in the picture is you?" Pierce asked expressionlessly. "It's me, what's wrong? I saved those people." Stark admitted. "In that case, it means that your warframe has a lot of lethal weapons, and if you want, you can now solve all of us present in an instant." Pierce said. "Wait. I'm not wearing armor now, how can I kill you?" Stark looked puzzled and spread his hands to rebut Pierce. "But you can, it all depends on whether you want it or not." With that, Pierce turned off the display, took out a document, and motioned for the person next to him to hand it to Stark. The latter took a look and found that the content of the document was to order Stark to hand over the armor. Not only that, but the design drawings of the warframe and the manufacturing method of the arc reactor must also be handed over. Are you kidding? How could I possibly agree to such conditions? Stark was so angry that he slammed the document to the ground and stomped on it a few times to show his determination that he would never agree to it. Whatever you decide, Mr. Stark, if you disagree with this document, you will face 120 charges of guilt. With a cold threat, Pierce stood up and knocked the hammer. Let's get here for today's hearing. Mr. Stark, I'll give you a chance to think about it, and give me an answer tomorrow. After saying 2 words, Pierce glanced at Stark contemptuously and was the first to leave the venue. Immediately afterwards, those brought by Pierce also left one after another. The first day of this hearing ended so quickly. Everything fits Pierce's fierce personality. No one else interjects, no pointless bickering, just lay out the conditions and evidence, it's as simple as that. This guy is really hard to deal with. After the hearing was suspended, Stark wiped the sweat from his forehead and muttered to himself. For the hearing, he was not without preparation in advance. It's just that in the imagination, Pierce is completely unlikely to interfere in the hearing, but only some boring parliamentarians and malicious arms dealers to talk nonsense. But now it's completely different. Tony, from a rational point of view, we must make a choice, Stark Industries and your Warframe, you must choose one. Pepper stepped forward and gave Stark a choice. Don't worry now, I'll see the situation. Stark didn't make a choice at all, left the venue directly, and drove back to Stark Industries alone. On the top floor of the building, Nick Fury and Peter Parker have been waiting for a long time, and in the huge room, there is Steve Rogers, frozen in a large block of ice. As you can see, this is Captain Steve. Parker took a half-hour sled ride from Antarctica, and then I sent your private jet to pick him up. Nick Fury briefly introduced, then came to the ice cube and pointed to Steve inside. Do you have a way to get him out? Of course. Stark nodded, immediately put on the arm of the armor, used the laser to cut the ice, and took out the Captain Steve inside. Decades of freezing, although maintaining Steve's age, made him stiff, and he could not wake up unless there was a special means. And Stark Industries just has this means. Parker, help me move him to the infirmary, where there is a treatment compartment to unfreeze Captain Steve. Stark instructs Parker to send Steve to the treatment room, and then the 3 of them gather and wait wide-eyed for the treatment chamber to return Steve to normal. After a 3-hour wait, a large amount of gas was ejected from the treatment chamber, and then the lid opened and a hand was outstretched. Where am I? Resuscitated Steve asked. Seeing that the captain finally woke up, everyone present breathed a sigh of relief, and suddenly felt that the future would not be so desperate. You're in Stark Industries building. Stark answered truthfully. And when he said the 3 words Stark and was heard by Steve, the latter's face immediately showed surprise. Are you Howard? Steve asked stunned. At the same time, he also looked at this old friend carefully, but he did not expect that he was not only unchanged, but also younger than before. No, Howard Stark is my father and I'm Tony Stark. Stark replied truthfully again. Your father. After receiving the answer, Captain Steve did not suddenly realize, but was even more confused. Wait a minute. I remember about a few weeks ago, when Howard didn't have a son, I would know if I had. Without waiting for a reply, he turned his gaze to the rest of the Stark building and said in surprise, has technology advanced so rapidly during this time? Looking at Captain Steve's reaction and what he said, Stark, Nick Fury, and Peter Parker looked at each other meaningfully. All of them were a little helpless. They don't know where to start with the matter in front of them. Decades later, Steve Rogers thought it was just a week or 2 ago. I don't know if the ice in Antarctica froze Steve's head, or if he really didn't have a concept of time. What the specific answer is, Stark is not clear. Only an enhanced person like Steve can be frozen by ice for decades without dying, which is an unprecedented rare case. Captain. After hesitating, Nick Fury still chose to tell Steve the truth. I am Nick Fury, the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., and I regret to tell you that World War II is over, and decades have passed since you fell into the Antarctic glacier during the fight against Hydra. As soon as the words fell, Steve's expression went from disbelief, to doubt, to shock. Although Nick Fury was right and Steve remembered falling into a glacier, he still couldn't believe it. How could it be? No. I only met Peggy 2 weeks ago, and I just. Steve muttered, shaking his head vigorously as if he were waking up from a nightmare. Finally, when Nick Fury was still trying to persuade, Stark directly opened the wall of the medical room with a button, and everything outside followed the sunlight into the field of view of several people. Steve walked to the wall and looked down. New York is now far more bustling than it was a few decades ago. The cars on the streets, the lights of the buildings, the advertisements, all show that this is a completely different era. Much more developed than it was during World War II. At this point, Steve had to believe that what Nick Fury said was right. Subsequently, Nick Fury did not continue to ask, or explain anything, but just took out an address and handed it to Steve. What do you mean? Steve took the address and looked at it, and found that the place indicated above was a hospital. You should go and say goodbye to your times, and then we have more important things. Nick Fury said quietly. Stark then called Harpy over and drove Steve to the hospital. It wasn't until the hospital found the ward written on the address that Captain Steve understood what Nick Fury meant. Peggy. As soon as he entered the ward, Steve recognized the identity of the person on the bed. This is exactly the woman he had a relationship with, Peggy, except that she is very old now. For Steve it was just 2 weeks ago, but for Peggy, it was decades. Steve Rogers. Peggy also recognized Steve's identity and waved to him tremblingly. Seeing this step, Harpy did not continue to pestle as a light bulb, and went directly to wait outside the ward. I hope God bless Captain Steve. Cheer up, tomorrow's hearing will need his help. As Stark's loyal deputy, Harpy's main concern is not whether Steve can be resurrected, but what role he can play in the current situation. Next, the hearing continued as usual. Pressure Mountain Pierce was still the last to enter after everyone appeared, sat down and looked at Stark with a sense of oppression, and did not speak. But His Majesty had replaced his mouth, and he asked Stark, have you thought about it? I'm still reluctant to hand over the armor and reactor drawings. Stark spread his hands. A little scoundrel, looking like a dead pig, was not afraid of boiling water. Are you sure? Pierce's gaze was cold. Of course. Stark nodded, and then said with a smile, I thought about it yesterday. In fact, I just didn't agree. At most, Stark Industries was taken away by you. I still have a huge amount of wealth. Even if I am sentenced to 1,000 years in prison, there is enough bail to get out of prison. Hearing this, Pierce took a deep breath, looking like he was about to erupt at any time, but in the end he said indifferently, you won't have the opportunity to bail, your personal freedom and Stark Industries, I will take it all. With that, he winked at the crossbone Rumlow beside him. The latter nodded, pulled an electric baton and handcuffs from his waist, and walked towards Stark. What? Even if I am guilty, I will have to be tried in federal court. Why would you arrest me in a hearing? Stark naturally didn't want to be taken away just like that, so he wanted to resist. And Rumlow was not a vegetarian, and stepped forward and stabbed Stark with an electric baton. But just as he was about to hit, a shield flew in and hit Rumlow's arm, causing the handcuffs to fly out along with the electric batons. This sudden situation made everyone notice for the first time, the shield that hit Rumlow in the arm and then nailed it to the wall. Then, I saw the main entrance of the hearing venue, and 3 figures slowly walked in. At the head is Steve. Captain Steve. Really a captain? Isn't he dead? Is this me? Seeing Steve walking in, everyone stood up in shock, some amazed, some doubting Steve's identity. However, the suspicion was not firm, because everyone had seen the iconic shield, and nothing proved Steve's identity more than this. Pressure Mountain Pierce, should I call you the former director of S.H.I.E.L.D., or Hydra? Steve asked as he walked. His words reached the ears of everyone present, and they all looked at Pierce in amazement. And those who were present all quickly turned on the recorder and camera to record everything Steve said. Today is a lucky day for the media. Not only did Steve, who had been missing for decades, reappear, but he also brought charges against Pierce. First of all, welcome back, Steve Rogers. Although accused by the sudden appearance of Steve, Pierce is also a battle-hardened veteran, not flustered, or even reacted at all. He looked at Steve like a calm pool, paused, and said, but your accusations against me are completely groundless, and I don't know what Hydra is. Don't be funny, if you don't even know about Hydra, you are not qualified to be the former director of S.H.I.E.L.D. Steve responded calmly, then walked to the screen at the hearing site and took out a disk and put it in the computer. Then, the screen connected to the computer immediately begins to play a picture. In the picture, Pierce and Siri are talking in a dark office, and the content they talk about is very sensitive, so that everyone present begins to doubt Pierce's identity. What the hell? Why is the picture of my meeting with you recorded by others? Pierce was not calm at this time, and asked in a low voice to Siri beside him. The latter spread his hands helplessly, looking confused, thinking that you don't know where I go. Pierce, a former SHIELD chief, has electromagnetic isolation equipment in his office, and every morning, noon and evening, professionals enter the office to check spy cameras or bugs. Moreover, Pierce also replaced these professionals with Hydra people, who categorically could not have installed cameras while working. Just as Pierce wondered, the picture continued to play. Long live Hydra! Siri stretched out his hand and shouted. Long live Hydra! Pierce responded indifferently. Later, Siri left the office, leaving Pierce alone on the sofa, and the scene ended. This picture, which is what Stark recorded after using the video recording equipment, after the multiple choice questions were completed, now finally comes in handy. No, 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 it can't be, this picture is a fake, without the slightest credibility. Pierce frowned, panicked in denial. Shut up, Pierce. Steve glanced at Pierce coldly, and then said to the media, I am Steve Rogers, I am credibility, I guarantee with my personality, Pierce must be a member of Hydra. Hearing this, the others in the room erupted into exclamations. They didn't dare to imagine that this former director of SHIELD turned out to be Hydra. After the end of World War II, Hydra has been nominally eliminated, so it is not classified information. As long as you are a fan of Steve America's team, you will know more or less about the old enemy organization of Hydra. Therefore, after Pierce was proved to be Hydra on video, others immediately understood and were shocked. Captain Steve, what if, as Pierce said, the video is fake? A reporter came forward and asked. Impossible, completely realistic technology to fake video, not even SHIELD. Steve directly denied it, then changed his tone and said, not only do we have video footage proving that Pierce is an undercover agent of Hydra, we have also investigated the inside of SHIELD and confirmed that many people are also undercover agents, and they are now being dealt with. As soon as these words came out, Pierce was not in a hurry to refute it, and directly took out his mobile phone and dialed a call. He didn't think that his years of cultivation in SHIELD would be solved so easily. But after the call was connected, an eager voice came from the other side, Mr. Pierce. We were called together by Nick Fury, and then the guy went on his own, leaving his trusted agent to deal with us. The man over there finished speaking, and then there was a voice, please come and save us. Pierce hung up the phone directly and glared angrily at Nick Fury. Obviously, the current director is the manipulator of everything, and the American team just stepped forward and became the most powerful of the people who accused Pierce. Now Pierce really wants to break his head and can't figure out why this former close friend would know his Hydra identity, and even secretly saved Team Steve. Former director Pierce, please explain. Are Team America's allegations true? Are you really Hydra's undercover agent? Wasn't Hydra completely wiped out in the first place? The reporters will not let go of this big news, questioning the truth of Pierce's affairs one by one, without shying away or fearing. Pierce did not respond. He stood up directly and left the venue under the cover of everyone around him. But at this moment, not only the American team, Peter Parker blocked the way, but also the security personnel on the perimeter of the venue, as well as agents of SHIELD. Let's go over here. Seeing that things were not good, Rumlow immediately covered Pierce to leave through another passage, but there were also security personnel there to intercept him. Only this time, they directly tore their faces, knocked all those security personnel down, and quickly left. Doing so also confirms Pierce's identity. Catch up with them. Steve was the first to chase after him, followed by Peter Parker, and Stark hurried back to Harpy and asked him for a suitcase that quickly put on his armor. A few seconds later, after Pierce walked into the passage, the door of the emergency passage was closed, and Steve quickly stepped forward, and just the moment he opened the door, a foot jerked out. Steve reacted quickly, immediately parrying with his shield, taking 2 steps back to gaze at the enemy in front of him. It was a guy in a white bone uniform with a mask. Captain, do you remember me? The man asked in a deep voice. Crossbones. Of course Steve remembered. At that time, during World War II, when fighting against the Red Skull had a crossbone under him. I'm not that crossbone, my name is Rumlow. After saying a word, Rumlow quickly stepped forward, drew two special electric batons from his waist, and took the initiative to attack. Steve didn't think that this guy could match his strength, so he punched him directly, thinking of solving this guy on the spot directly. But Rumlow easily dodged the swift punch and went around Steve's back, where two electric batons were placed on Steve's waist and the button was pulled. The strong electric current hit, and even Steve after the strengthening convulsed a few times, but still endured the pain and kicked Rumlow away. After a short exchange, Steve also realized Rumlow's ability, that is, fighting skills, and combat experience. Steve, I am indeed not as strong as you, but I have skills, and my master is a master of imitation. You may not know him. Rumlow twirled the electric baton and said with an eerie smile. But just as he was about to fight Steve, a bunch of spider silk suddenly spewed out from the shadows and wrapped Rumlow firmly. Watch out for sneak attacks, Mr. Crossbone. Peter Parker fell from the ceiling to the ground and spewed another pile of spider silk at Rumlow. It's not fair. Quote. Rumlow originally wanted to fight Steve Rogers for 300 rounds with his excellent fighting skills to see what the rumored American team of great fame was. But he didn't expect that for a moment, he was unexpectedly subdued from behind by a young man who sounded like a child. Crossbones, mercenaries, executioners. Are you talking to us about fairness? Steve walked up to Rumlow and a shield smashed into his head. The vibranium shield plus Steve's power was no joke, and directly smashed Rumlow into a slight concussion on the spot, unconscious. Rumlow is Pierce's right-hand man, and as soon as he lies down, Pierce's fate is basically determined. Get out of my way, stuff. Pierce boarded the car with his entourage under cover and prepared to force a path through the crowd. But at this moment, Steve and Peter Parker chased after him, and directly ahead, Stark had already put on his armor and locked Pierce's vehicle in midair. Pierce, sitting in the car, could clearly see the weapons on the armor, and those deadly weapons were all ready to beat him and the car to pieces. Of course, the premise is that he chooses to resist stubbornly and die without surrendering. Long live Hydra. Agent Siri, who was driving, roared and was about to step on the accelerator to the bottom to try his luck, but then Pierce stopped him. Siri looked at Pierce with doubtful eyes, very puzzled. Inside Hydra, failure of the mission does not necessarily mean death. When you really need to die, your identity has been revealed, and there is no way back. So Siri naturally thinks that Pierce will also choose Jade and Stone Burning. He is the high ranking of Hydra, and if he is caught, he will be in trouble. But Pierce apparently doesn't think so. Goodbye, Siri. Pierce said goodbye, and then, at lightning speed, took out his pistol and killed everyone in the car who was outside him. In the end, he opened the door with a blank face, covered in blood, and got out of the car. Pierce, I didn't expect you to be so cold-blooded. Nick Fury glanced at the body in the car and said in a deep voice. Just now, the corpses in the car were still covering Pierce, trying to leave the venue to escape, but Pierce was unsympathetic and directly shot them dead when he wanted to surrender. Such a person can be said to be completely inhuman. You should thank me, Fury. If I don't kill them, even if I am in the upper echelon, they will not allow me to surrender. Pierce said with a smile. He didn't care at all, as if the person he had killed just now was not his fellow Hydra at all, but some cats and dogs. Okay. Nick Fury didn't say anything more, nodded, and then punched Pierce hard when he was about to turn away. Nick Fury was also born into death anyway, and he punched Pierce directly to the ground, causing him to convulsion on the ground a few times before passing out. It's over. Stark slowly fell to the ground, and while walking towards Nick Fury, he said indifferently, I hope you can play the role of your director and help me lift the restrictions on Stark Industries from all walks of life. Don't worry, it's not a problem. Nick Fury nodded, then looked at Steve and stretched out his right hand. Thank you, Captain. If it weren't for you, things would be troublesome. Hearing this, Steve shook hands with Nick Fury, and then thought of a very strange thing. Because of this strange thing, Steve's brows furrowed again and asked, I've always wondered, how did you know that Pierce is a Hydra? And how do you know exactly where I'm frozen? Quote. These two questions were thrown out one after another. Out of trust in his allies and the principle of intelligence disclosure, Nick Fury opened his mouth to tell the truth, but felt that these things were too outrageous, so he chose to remain silent for the time being. Some things are long stories, wait until tonight, we will find a chance to show you, you will understand. Nick Fury said. Demonstrate it. Steve raised an eyebrow, not quite understanding what Nick Fury meant. Why is it a demonstration? Did S.H.I.E.L.D. have the technology to foresee the future, or did they have some evidence? Night. Inside Stark Industries. After Nick Fury held Pierce with the highest level of security, he returned to Stark Tower and went to the top floor. At this time, Captain Steve and the others had been waiting for a long time. Good evening everyone, now let's see if that magical multiple choice question will appear. Nick Fury said hello, sat down and glared at the others, just waiting. After a few moments, multiple choice questions finally appeared. Important choice. In Thor 1, why did Thor come to Earth? A. Teleported by Thanos. B. Exiled by the Chitauri. C. Teleported by the Cosmic Cube. D. Exiled by Odin. Correct answer. Reward a replica of Mjolnir. Wrong answer. Among the 4 people of Nick Fury, Peter Parker, Steve Rogers, and Tony Stark, a random unlucky egg bleed himself. That's what you call a magic choice question. Steve pointed to Nick Fury, who was directly across the table. Although in front of him was this bald chief, in his line of sight, there was a line of words floating between the two, which looked very strange. Long before Nick Fury came, Peter Parker, who liked to talk non-stop, had already given Steve Kopp the multiple choice question. At first, Steve thought that this kid who was still in high school was joking, but seeing Stark also prove it with a serious face, Steve had to believe it. Until now, it can be regarded as seeing is believing, and it is clear and clear. The important thing is not whether the multiple choice question is magical or not, but that we must answer correctly this time, otherwise one of us will blow himself up. Nick Fury said with a heavy and serious face. Listening to his words, Peter Parker and Stark did not question it, and both nodded vigorously. Everyone in the room, including Steve, knew that multiple choice questions were no joke. He could give people mithril silver, he could give people anti-Hulk armor blueprints, and he could give Steve the coordinates of his frozen location. So now everyone has enough reason to believe that if they answer incorrectly, they will really blow themselves up. However, if you answer correctly, you can also get Mjolnir, which is both risk and reward, which is fair. I don't think it's that difficult. Peter Parker said while casually picking up a piece of paper and pen, and wrote the words Thor, Mjolnir, and Odin on it. He then passed the paper to Stark, Nick Fury, and Steve to see. When a few people understood it, Peter Parker said, these terms seem to be nouns in Norse mythology, and in mythology there is indeed a thunder god called Thor, the father god called Odin, and an artifact called Thor's hammer. That's right. Stark affirmed, adding, these terms alone may be coincidences, such as Thor is a mission codename, or a nickname given to himself by a guy, but when these terms all appear together, it is definitely not a coincidence. After speaking, Stark and Peter Parker looked at each other, and the two smart people obviously realized the doorway. So Norse mythology. Nick Fury expressed his affirmation with a questioning sentence, then pointed to the exiled by Odin option above and asked, there is another question, that is, Thor and Odin should be in the same camp, why was he exiled? I also want to ask, as we all know, the evil characters in Norse mythology, basically Loki, the giants and the dragons, and Nursery is Odin's son, how could he be exiled? Steve chimed in. Hearing the questions raised by the two, Peter Parker frowned and nodded. This matter is indeed strange, and I really can't draw conclusions at will. Maybe it was not Odin who forced the Nursery to come to Earth, but other forces. As soon as the words fell, the 4 people fell completely silent. The clue to the answer found today is Norse mythology, plus terms such as Odin and Thor, the god of thunder. Other than that, nothing else is understood. The Cosmic Cube and Chitauri know a little, but who Thanos is, then they don't know at all. Maybe Nursery did something wrong and Odin exiled him. Anyway, the relevant answer is this one, unless you want to gamble and choose one at random. Stark made up his mind. This statement is indeed true. Among the answers, it is Odin who is related to childcare, and it is not clear whether the rest is related. Although the Cosmic Cube is in S.H.I.E.L.D., the study of this thing is only known to have high energy. Zeteri appeared in previous multiple-choice questions as an alien species that will invade in the future. No matter how you think about it, these two things will not have anything to do with the exile of the nursery, so you can only choose Odin. Just Odin, right is right, wrong is wrong, anyway, we don't know the relevant information, we can only guess. Nick Fury slapped the table and chose to try his luck. In the end, 4 people read out Odin's option at the same time, and the multiple-choice question changed. Correct answer. Quake replica rewards have been distributed. After the 2 lines of words were displayed, the multiple-choice question disappeared directly, and a hammer appeared out of thin air and fell on the table surrounded by 4 people. Wait. Just when Peter Parker wanted to touch it, Nick Fury stopped it, and then cautiously said to Stark, "In mythology, this thing is Thor's weapon, maybe there is high-voltage electricity wrapped around, we have to measure it first." I agree. Stark turned around, took out a series of related equipment, and began to test Mjolnir. Finally, after confirming that this was a hammer, the 4 of them relaxed their hearts. A hammer. This is the so-called Mjolnir. Stark walked up to him nonchalantly, grabbing the hilt of Mjolnir with one hand and trying to pick it up, but he found that he couldn't lift it with any force. This strange phenomenon surprised Nick Fury and others, and they were even more curious about what was special about this hammer. I still don't believe it. Stark rolled up his sleeves, put on his Warframe hands, grabbed me on the hammer with both hands, and used all his strength. The armor's arm shoots flames downwards, trying to lift the hammer with thrust, but to no avail, the hammer just doesn't move. Strange thing. Peter Parker looked at the hammer and wondered, this thing doesn't look heavy, otherwise this table wouldn't be able to withstand it, but it's actually heavy. Let's try them all, maybe someone else can pick them up. Nick Fury said and stepped forward to try to pick up Mjolnir, but tried to no avail. Then came Peter Parker, who couldn't pick it up either. In the end, Steve stepped forward, put one hand on Mjolnir, and tried it with slight force, but only wasted a little strength and picked up the Mjolnir. What is the situation? Why is your power stronger than my Warframe? Stark's eyes widened and he looked at Steve with a puzzled expression. He didn't expect that the serum made by his father Howard Stark could strengthen the strength of a mortal to be stronger than a machine. It is no exaggeration to say that this hammer, even if he wears anti-Hulk armor, it is impossible to carry it. I don't know what's going on, this hammer seems to be like a myth, it has spirituality, only those who have his approval can pick up this hammer. Myth. All right. Nick Fury nodded. Although this myth and legend is a bit mysterious and does not sound very reliable, it is the only explanation now. Take the hammer, Captain. Stark said a little disappointed, then looked at Nick Fury and asked, what are we going to do next? Quote. Next we need to pull 2 more agents into the Avengers, both of whom serve in S.H.I.E.L.D. and are absolutely reliable. Nick Fury voiced his next plan. In S.H.I.E.L.D. So what are you waiting for? Don't you just get them in quickly? Stark was in a hurry. The hearing was a mess for him, and although Pierce chased Stark Industries and almost put Stark in prison, the result was good. However, this made Stark realize that he could no longer stay out of the situation, and that if he wanted to protect everything he had to let the Avengers grow rapidly, otherwise everything would be for nothing. I'm glad you're so motivated, Stark. Nick Fury praised, and then his face became a little embarrassed, and he said in a deep voice, the agent's code name is Hawkeye and Black Widow, the former is on a mission, and the latter is dealing with a guy codenamed Imitation Master. There is nothing to worry about, since it is a future comrade in arms, then we have to help her and tell us where the Imitation Master is. Steve said awe-inspiringly. Natasha is in. Nick Fury felt that he could let Parker, Steve and Stark run in, so he planned to tell the location of Black Widow Natasha. But before the words were finished, a rapid ringing came, forcing Nick Fury to take out the phone and connect it. Hey, Chief Fury, I'm Natasha. The phone turned on hands-free, and the voice came out and entered everyone's ears. After learning that the person on the other side of the phone was Black Widow Natasha, Stark and Steve looked at each other, and both had indescribable expressions on their faces. They all understand the military and know very well that an agent, a spy, cannot use a public phone to talk under any circumstances, let alone directly identify himself. From this point alone, this Black Widow seems a bit amateurish. Natasha, you can't be confused for a moment and make a mistake in the phone, right? This is a pay phone, there is a communicator inside Shield, why are you? Nick Fury was interrupted halfway through his sentence. My communicator was robbed, time was short, I had to use a pay phone to talk to you, and I had to identify myself directly. Natasha's voice was very urgent, sounding as if she had encountered some life or death event. And if his communicator is taken away, time is very short, and he only has a means of communication on his pay phone, then it is understandable what Natasha did. Then, without waiting for Nick Fury to ask, Natasha did not pause and said the current situation in one breath. Director Fury, I don't know why my identity was leaked. Anthony not only knows who I am, but also knows where my safe house is. He suddenly attacked just now, and now he is running to you. These contents were listened to word by several people, and then everyone showed a puzzled expression. Natasha is a top agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., how can her identity be known? Moreover, it was a safe house arranged by S.H.I.E.L.D., and the location was also top secret, how could it be known by Imitation Master Anthony Pierce? After a moment of contemplation, Nick Fury pronounced a name. Pressure Mountain Pierce's level is high, and if anyone can reveal Natasha's identity and safe house, it must be Pierce. You mean Pressure Mountain Pierce? How did he do it? Stark looked shocked. He was not a spy worker. I don't know why Pierce was arrested yesterday, and today he can still do things under the nose of Nick Fury. In this matter, unfortunately Nick Fury is not clear. It can only be said that there are still undercover agents with Hydra inside S.H.I.E.L.D. After a brief surprise, Nick Fury immediately took out the communicator and ordered Hill in S.H.I.E.L.D. From now on, until Pierce is caught in, all those who have contact with him will be detained, and then the security level will be raised to the red level. He skillfully commanded and planned. This person who had no superpowers, but had extraordinary ability to handle affairs, would not be defeated by some of Pierce's small means. Yes, Chief. Hill replied, and then went to execute. Just as Nick Fury was about to put down the communicator, there was a rapid rustle, followed by electricity, and then a male voice. Nick Fury, old friend, I advise you to keep your head down. The voice warned. Anthony. Nick Fury directly recognized the owner of the voice, no doubt as a former agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., Anthony. During an escort mission, this guy accidentally absorbed the potion that was the target of the mission, and then became divine, and his eyesight was very strong, and anyone could imitate it. He is a master of imitation. Keep your head down. Against such a dangerous character, Nick Fury did not bother to grind his lips and directly carry out his warning. Hearing the order, Peter Parker, Steve, and Stark immediately bowed their heads. In the next second, the wall on the top floor of Stark Industries was blown through by a rocket, followed by smoke grenades, tear gas bombs all thrown in, and in the various smoke, a sturdy figure jumped from the aircraft and strode in. Anthony's gaze looked away and found Nick Fury choked and rolled on the ground, almost suffocating. The other three people, on the other hand, didn't do anything at all. Peter Parker and Steve have been strengthened, naturally not afraid of smoke grenades and tear gas grenades, and Stark has already put on the armor for the first time just now, and there is nothing at all. When you sneaked up, you called to remind you, do you seem to be a gentleman? Steve spoke in a fighting stance, ready to deal with Anthony's attack. No, it's not a sneak attack, it's a surprise attack, believe it or not, I'm quite righteous myself, and I don't like this kind of sneak attack. Anthony shook his head with a smile, his face hidden under the mask twisted with a grin. Finally, his gaze fell on Nick Fury, and said coldly, I still want to tell you now, my target is Nick Fury, I will take him away, you either stop me or get out. As soon as the words fell, without waiting for Anthony to strike first, Steve directly attacked first, throwing the shield he was best at using violently. Sure enough, it's the same as on the video. Anthony smiled, dodged the shield, and then when the shield flew by, he pulled it back and threw it towards Steve in the opposite direction. Steve never dreamed that someone could grab his shield and throw it back in imitation, so he was caught off guard and flew out directly by the shield. And the shield circled directly in the air and returned to the hands of the imitation master. Just as the two were fighting, Peter Parker had already circled behind him and rushed directly towards the imitation master, wanting to subdue him with his own power. However, the imitation master turned around directly, grabbed Peter Parker's body and threw it directly over his shoulder. Don't fight him in close combat. This guy can do any fighting technique. Nick Fury reminded with a cough. Hearing that no melee combat, Stark was just willing, and he directly fired his fire, beckoning all kinds of ranged attacks towards Anthony. After a crackling laser bombardment, Anthony's position was blown to rubble and smoke. Just when Stark thought that Anthony in the smoke would inevitably lie on the ground, a shield flew out of the smoke, knocking Stark back several steps. However, the shield that bounced off was caught by Steve and thrown directly against the wall, hitting Anthony with geometry and smashing him directly off the top floor of the building. Thanks for watching.